Good evening, good evening. Welcome one and all back to Romans 8:28 Publishing here on Word Alive, where we are looking to bring you a word of life tonight, a word that will not just be a word of information, but as always, we're looking to bring you a word of inspiration and of transformation, one that can make a change in your life. And I believe that this lesson is just one of them as we continue on in our recipe for the legendary victory. It's been good so far, and it's only going to get better because we're on to the battlefield now. And David is ready to take on Goliath here as we're in 1 Samuel chapter 17, that infamous story of David and Goliath, that little boy who beat up the giant, the formidable one, that formidable opponent that we talked about in our first lesson. And we're going to be looking tonight at verses 48 through 54. And our lesson for tonight is do your part. That's right, we've got to do our part. Now, I actually had a different title for this lesson back when I first started working on it, because I was looking at what David did very literally, and it was actually a little bit of a gory title, but we'll get into that a little bit later on, because I said, you know what, that's what he had to do for that battle, and although what we need for each battle is the same, depending on the enemy, we've got to use some different tactics when we do our part. And up until this point, David has been on that 90% journey. He hasn't attacked anybody. Nobody's attacked him. And for those of you who have been watching the previous videos, you may understand what the 90% journey is. But for those who haven't watched it yet, what we've been talking about through every one of these lessons is that 90% of what goes into that legendary victory happens before you ever get onto the battlefield with that enemy. So it's what you do today that's going to determine the outcome of your legendary victory that might not come for days, weeks, months, years, or even decades down the line. So we're looking at, for example, David on his journey, because this legendary victory is not an event, it is a journey. And on this journey, David had to pick up some things along the way as he was getting there. And it's interesting because he picked up some things he picked up from good things that happened to him. That anointing, he was anointed as the king to be the next king before any of this ever happened. And the thing, and to know that God has a plan for your life like that, to know that he sees something in you of that type of greatness, that is a great thing. But you know what? Every bit of what he needed for the journey didn't come from something great. Probably some of the most important things that he needed when he gets to the battlefield, he got from negative things. He had to fight lions. He had to fight bears. And I'm sure when he had to fight the lion, he wasn't excited about it. He wasn't going, yay, lion. No, he didn't want to do it. But yet we see that even in that negative thing, he got something that he needed for his legendary victory. He had some chances and some things where he got opportunities just through being obedient. That practice of being obedient led him to where he had the opportunity for the legendary victory. And then as we were looking at last week, just by his faith, he got a step closer to that legendary victory, because by his faith being built up along this journey, he didn't flee and run and hide and look for his, if you saw last week's episode, his holdback guy. He didn't look for his holdback guy when he got onto the battlefield. He didn't say, yo, Eliab, come hold me back because this guy's kind of big. No, he stood his ground 10 toes down, as the kids say these days, and took on that giant. But here's the thing. Today, it changes a little bit, because now David has been getting poured into him from God what he needs for the legendary victory. But now it's time for David to pour it back out again. That's right. David has to bring forth all the things that God has put in with him along this journey. And to this point, really, it's all been a lot of words from what we've seen here in 1 Samuel 17. It's been him talking about his faith. It's him talking about what he's been through. It's him telling his allies, no, I'm not going to deal with you, but this one I'm going to share my testimony with. It's been him standing on the battlefield and telling Goliath, yeah, you say you're going to feed me to the crows, amen. But you know what? My God is going to defeat you, right? So it's been strong, it's been faith-filled, but yet it has been all words to this point. And you know what? Words are great, and I don't want to downplay the importance of words. because words, as the scriptures tell us, that the power of life and death is in the tongue, and the things that we speak are critically important. Other scriptures tell us how it compares the tongue to the rudder of a ship, right? A small rudder steers a huge ship. That's the power of the tongue. It's small, but it holds a lot of power. But when it comes to the legendary victory, there comes a time when we got to stop talking and we've got to start doing. Because this is the thing. In the words that we speak activate our faith, but they don't complete our faith. And you may be wondering, what do you mean activate and complete, right? Let me give you a couple of illustrations here. Number one, I lose my debit card, and they have to mail me out a new debit card. And what do? When I get it, there's a little phone number on there. I call it up. I put in what I want my PIN number to be a couple times. They verify who I am, and it activates the card. So the card is active. The card now has the ability, and I have the faith that if I need that card, that it's going to have the ability to do what I want it to do. But if I put it in my wallet and never take it out again, that's all it is an active card. It's not a useful card. It's not a productive card. It's not living up to its purpose. It's active, but it's not completed yet. And let me give you now I got my professor garb on, right? My wife put me in the turtleneck tonight, so I'm kind of looking like the professor. So we're going to go with a little bit of a physics lesson here, right? Objects can have potential energy or kinetic energy. Our words give us potential, right? But see, this ball has potential energy. That means that because of the position it's in, it has the potential, it has the possibility of producing energy. But until I drop the ball, that's all it is potential energy. Now, when I drop the ball, it's kinetic energy. What does that mean? That means that the potential has now been put into action and it has produced what it was intended to produce. And the things that we speak, they encourage us, they lift us up, and God hears it, and God honors it, and God loves these things. But until we put that word into action, it's just activated. It's not completed. It's not productive. It's not doing what it was intended to do. Now, for those of you who want a scripture to back it up, I'm going to tell you, because I think sometimes in the church, we think that just believing something is going to make everything right, is going to make everything happen, right? But in James, the book of James, it says what? In James chapter 1, verses 14 through 17, it says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith, but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and be well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it?" And then what does he say? "In the same way, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead." Right? So now you may say, well, okay, but are you keeping that in the right context? And is that really supported by other scriptures? I'm glad you asked, because I was prepared for such a question. I don't know if anybody actually was thinking that out there, but I'm going to answer the question anyway. Because when we think about faith and we think about the legends of our faith, we can go to Hebrews chapter 11, very popular chapter in the Bible, really encouraging in those that are in the faith. But let me read something to you here. Let's look at what Hebrews chapter 11 says about these legends. "By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain." He had to take some action. He had to do some things. "By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark." He built an ark. He took action. It doesn't say he believed that it was going to rain. No, it says he built an ark to save his family. "By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went." He didn't just believe that God was going to do it. He obeyed and went. "By faith, Moses' parents hid him to save him from Pharaoh. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea. By faith, the prostitute Rahab welcomed the spies. So we see that when we're talking about these legends of the faith, I could go on and say, by faith, Peter preached on Pentecost. I could go on and say, by faith, Stephen educated the Pharisees. I could say, by faith, and this is one of the big ones here that I think we often overlook. Joseph took a pregnant woman that he had never lain with as his wife by faith, because an angel came to him and said, yeah, it's of God. And by faith, he did this thing. So we see that this faith thing has to have some action that's attached to it. Because what is it? Faith without action is dead. And so we're going to see this is where we're at now in David's battle, in David's legendary victory. It's now time for David to take that faith and move it into action. I'll tell you one of my favorite definitions for faith, and faith is obedience without reservation. And when we think about Abraham, it referred to Abraham in Hebrews chapter 11, that when he was called to go, he went. It didn't say he made plans. It didn't say he checked with somebody else. It didn't say he saw someone else's counsel. God told him to go and he went. Faith is obedience without reservation. So without action, there really is no faith. For example, let's say I have faith, but what if God directs me to help someone out and I say, well, I can't help them because what if I need it later? Or I know I'm supposed to tithe, but what if I don't tithe because I think, well, then I'm not going to have it when it comes time for me to pay my bill? What if I know I am called to love my wife like Christ loved the church, but I say, you know what? I can't give myself over to her like that because I've been hurt by women before and I'm afraid of it happening again, right? So here I claim this faith, and none of our faith is perfect, but we see that now there's an action that I've got to put to my faith to show that I have my faith. And that scripture in James goes on to say, show me your faith without your deeds, and I'll show you my faith by my deeds. And that's what David is showing here. He's spoken his faith a lot. But now we're going to see David is going to put his faith into action. And here's where I want to stop and talk just for a second about my original title for this and why I had to change the title. My original title was Knock Your Enemy Out, Cut Off Their Head, and Display Their Rotting Corpse. Because that's what David did, right? David knocked Goliath out, cut off his head, and displayed his rotting corpse. But I want us to understand this, that's not the way you're going to deal with every enemy you meet on the battlefield. See, David was facing an enemy that could not be, that had no love for him, that had nothing but disdain for him, that wanted to see nothing but him and everyone he loved destroyed. And the only way to defeat that enemy was to knock him out, cut off his head, and display his rotting corpse. But not every enemy not every legendary battle we have is going to be against an enemy that wants to destroy us, that has no good for us, that has no ability to be of value to our life. And I want to tell you, if you doubt that, I'm going to tell you this. My biggest, greatest legendary victories have been against myself. And I don't think I'm probably the only one out there that occasionally, when you stepped on the battle for that legendary victory, you were looking in the mirror when you did it. Or that maybe there was someone in your life, whether it was a family member, whether it was a friend, whether it was someone that had been in your life, and you knew they loved you, but someone had gotten in their ear. And so not every enemy is going to be one that we gotta knock him out, cut off his head, and display his rotting corpse. So I changed what David does here, rather than looking at the specifics of what he did, what it represents. Number one, stop the enemy. Number two, complete the victory. And this is where we often, hand raised first, this is where we often fall short, is that we don't complete the victory. And then share your testimony. And we're actually going to look at two legendary victories tonight. One showing how you handle that enemy that wants nothing but bad for you. and how you handle that enemy that could be an ally and could be a blessing to you. Just like when we talked about overcoming your allies. Remember, we talked about allies that hated you and allies that loved you but were just worried about you. In the same way, when we're facing our enemies, remember, we're fighting against spirits here. We're not fighting against the flesh, the person that we see in front of us. So we've got to be able to identify the spirit behind the enemy. Is it fear the spirit? Or is it hate the spirit, right? If it's hate, there's not much you can do with it. But if it's fear that's driving them to be your enemy, now that's something where we can address it a different way. So first we're going to start by looking at David and his legendary victory. And then we're going to hop over and we're going to look at one of my favorite non-Jesus characters in the whole Bible. And that is Joseph. We're going to look at Joseph and how he got his legendary victory. The reason I love Joseph, I just feel like I almost see so much Jesus in him. Like everybody else, had these foibles and had these weaknesses and had these terrible things that they did. But Joseph just always seemed to kind of keep that steady dependence on God. So if we look at David, we're going to pick up in 1 Samuel 17, and we're going to pick up at verse 48. And I'm going to hit certain words here so you can get what I'm talking about. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So here we have it. In order to stop the enemy, what did you notice about the words I hit? They're all action words. He ran, he reached, he slung, he struck, right? These are actions that David had to take. He wasn't standing there being passive. He was following God's leading and telling and doing exactly what God had told him to do. And so by doing this, God allowed him to stop the enemy. And this is what we need to do. Sometimes the first thing we need to do when we're going through is we got to stop that enemy from doing things. And we're going to look at, I want to just stress this too. You can't always stop. Now, David was able to here. David was actually able to stop the enemy from doing what the enemy wanted to do. Now, we're going to see when we look at Joseph, I want to encourage you in this. You can't always stop your enemy from doing what they want to do. What you can always stop, though, is letting it impact you the way that they want it to impact you, right? So defeating the enemy, stopping the enemy doesn't always mean that you can stop the enemy from doing what they want to do. If someone wants to gossip, they're going to gossip, right? But you can stop it from impacting you the way that the enemy wants it to impact you. And then as we go on, it says, so David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down, again, action words, the Philistine and killed him. David ran once again, see all action words here, and stood over him, that's an action. He took hold of, another action, the Philistine's sword and drew it from its sheath. What's that? Another action, right? So we're getting the picture here, right? Faith without action is dead. And after he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistine to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. So again, the action is continuing. They're even pursuing the enemy after Goliath is dead. And so we see here, what says, complete our victory. And this is where, again, I think very often we come up short. We get, let's say we have a financial issue, right? We've run up a whole bunch of debt. We don't know how to get out of it. We finally work it out. God provides us a way where we're able to do it. God provides us either some finances. He allows us to use a bankruptcy, whatever the case might be, to get out of that financial issue, right? So here we've stopped the enemy. We've stopped the enemy. He's not doing what he was doing before, but we don't complete the victory. What does that mean? We don't ever change our spending habits, right? We get everything all caught up. God has given us this blessing that allows us to pay off our debt, but then we go back out out and we run the dead up again. What? Allowing the enemy again to stand up again and come attack, right? What if David had just knocked Goliath out and left him laying there? Now Goliath can rise up again and attack. We look at it with our health issues a lot, right? Maybe you've been diagnosed with something. You've been diagnosed with some type of lung cancer, right? And here God has healed you from the lung cancer and you're still smoking, right? You can't just stop the enemy. You've got to complete the victory, which completing the victory 99 times out of 100 means making a change in yourself, staying with God, keeping in touch with God, and making those changes that He directs you to make in your life. Why? So that enemy cannot rise up and come up against you. Right? Your wife, you had a little issue in your marriage, and here God has blessed you. She has forgiven you, and yet you're still keeping in touch with all your old girlfriends through Facebook. Right? You're allowing that enemy to rise up one more time. So this is what we've got to do. It's not enough to just stop the enemy. We've got to complete the victory, complete the defeat, complete the stopping of the enemy to make sure that they cannot rise up again. And we go on. More action from David. So we've got complete the victory. We've got stop the enemy, complete the victory, and all we've got left is to share your testimony. And David had a unique way of doing his boost. What did David do? David took action again, the Philistines' head, action again, brought it to Jerusalem, and he put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. So this is where really we're kind of building already toward our next legendary victory through this here, right? By displaying the victory, by sharing what God has done for us, right? Not only do we get a victory out of it, but now we've shared our victory with the people that we've loved. We shared our victory with the people around us. We've shared our victory with people that are hurting and helped to move them along the way to their legendary victory. So it's just that legendary victory is never, ever meant for just us. When God gives us a legendary victory, He does it so that we can encourage another toward their legendary victory, so that someone that's lost can be found, so that someone that's hurting can be healed, so someone that's of low self-esteem can be lifted up and encouraged in their sanctified soul. So we got to make sure again that once we stop the enemy, that once we complete the victory, that we've got to make sure we're sharing the testimony of what Jesus has done in our lives with others, so that they can see a hope in the problem that they're going through. And then when you do that and you've helped someone along that way, that's another crown that you can cast at Jesus' feet when you get to heaven. Yeah, we don't get to keep our crowns, but I'm looking forward to throwing them at Jesus' feet when I get to heaven. But in order to do that, once you get that legendary victory, once you've completed your victory, you've got to make sure that you are sharing your testimony to encourage others. Right? So this is what David had to do, because David's enemy wanted his destruction. Okay? But we're going to look at now at Joseph, right? Joseph, he had several enemies to defeat. He really was one that, he was very happy to be the favorite child of his father, which raised up some resentment among his brothers and sisters. And then, of course, David had some dreams where in the dreams his brothers and sisters, and then in his second dream even his mother and father are bowing down to him. And let's face it, if people are already jealous of you, when you share things like that, it might put them off a little bit. And sometimes we can create our own enemies by the things that we say. Certainly David didn't have coming to him what ended up happening to him now. So if you're not familiar with the story of Joseph, what happened is Joseph's brothers were jealous of him because he was the favorite son. And so what they did was originally they were going to kill him. But then they showed some mercy on him and just sold him as a slave to some Ishmaelites who took him into Egypt and made him a slave in the home of a high-ranking person in Egypt by the name of Potiphar. So here his brothers because really, not out of mercy, I was joking when I said out of mercy, they sold him into slavery because they figured we may as well make a couple dollars out of it rather than just killing him. We can make a couple bucks and still get rid of him too. But we're going to look at what does Joseph do when he gets into Potiphar's house. And again, we're focusing on action here. That faith is when we put that faith into action, that's when it leads to legendary victories. So Joseph is a slave in Potiphar's house. And it says, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and here's where it comes, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. The Lord didn't give him success in everything he didn't do. How is the Lord going to give you success in something you didn't do? You know that God called you to do something. I know that God has called me to do things on occasions, and I didn't do them. How is he going to give me success in it if I don't do it? So here, because Joseph stayed faithful, Joseph continued to work for Potiphar. I love it. Again, we see Joseph here, and this is why I love Joseph so much, doing what hasn't even been written yet. In the book of Ephesians, it says, slaves, work for your masters as though working for Jesus. So because Joseph was working for his masters as though he was working for Jesus, God was able to bless him by what? By what he did. Okay? Now, what's his reward for being such a good and faithful servant? Well, he also happened to be handsome. And so Potiphar's wife had designs on him. And he goes into the house one day and he's working around the house and everybody else is out of the house and nobody else is around and he happens to come across Potiphar's wife. Well, Potiphar's wife tries to get him to lay with her. Well, he runs out of the house. So he does the best he can do, which is, you know what? She's got a hold of my coat. I'm leaving the coat here and I'm running out the door fast as I can. But then when Potiphar comes home, his wife says, look, he came in to try and take me and he left his jacket here. And where does Joseph end up? Faithful Joseph ends up in prison. So if you think that being faithful, doing right means you're never going to have a problem, just talk to Joseph about that, okay? And so what happens now when Joseph gets into prison, though, again, we see that Joseph finds favor. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor. And it says, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in what? Whatever he did. He didn't give him favor in what he didn't do. So we see here, how does Joseph stop his enemies? And this is where I want to touch on what I touched on a little bit when I was talking about David. He stopped his enemy. And you may be thinking, but did he really stop his enemy? His brothers still sold him into slavery. His brothers still got the money. Potiphar still had him thrown in prison. So as I was saying, you can't always stop what they're doing to you, but you can stop how it impacts you. He didn't let it make him cynical. It didn't make him be less than what he could be. He said, I'm accountable for what I do. They did wrong, that's fine, but wherever I'm at, I'm going to do right. So David stopped his enemy, not by stopping them from doing what they wanted to do, but he said, what you do is not going to impact me. What you do is not going to make me step out of my character. What you do is not going to make me act less like I'm supposed to as a disciple of Jesus Christ. So this is what I want to encourage you in. If that person is still coming at you, if they're still gossiping, stop them by not letting it affect you the way that they're hoping that it will. So here we go. We've seen that Joseph here has stopped his enemy. But how does he go about getting complete victory? Right? Because when he's in prison, there are two of Pharaoh's workers that come to him with different dreams, and he interprets the dreams correctly. And one of them is kept in jail. One of them is actually killed. The other one, he interprets his dream and tells him, you're going to be freed. That's what this dream is saying. And the man says, well, you know what? If I'm freed, then when I get to Pharaoh, I'm going to tell him all about you. Well, guess what he did when he got to Pharaoh? Forgot all about Joseph for years. But one day Pharaoh had a dream. Pharaoh had a dream where, and he had a couple dreams. I'm just going to go over one because the interpretation of the dreams is the same. He had a dream where there were 7 big fat cows, right? They were doing well. They were hefty. They were giving lots of milk. They had lots of meat on the bone. And what happened was 7 skinny cows came along and ate the 7 fat cows. And so Pharaoh's looking for somebody to explain this to him, and nobody can explain it to him. And that worker, I believe it was the cupbearer, it was the cupbearer for Pharaoh, remembers now, oh yeah, Joseph interpreted my dream years ago. And he brings Joseph before Pharaoh. So here now, Joseph has been given the opportunity to get out of prison if he can interpret Pharaoh's dream. And so Joseph does interpret Pharaoh's dream correctly, and here now he can get out of prison, but that's not the complete victory. That's a partial victory because he's out of prison. But what does Joseph do after this point? He doesn't just interpret the dream, he completes the job to get himself complete freedom. He says, after he interprets the dream and says, look, this is what the dream means. It means there's going to be 7 good, abundant years in the land, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine that are going to eat up everything that was made in those 7 years, and then some. So, but the thing I love about it is he didn't stop there. He could have said, I got my freedom, I interpreted the dream, now let Pharaoh deal with it. But what I love about Joseph is, he said, you know what? But I don't want to watch these people suffer like this. So I'm not only going to interpret the dream, I'm going to give you a solution. What you need to do is you need to take someone wise, put them over the land for those 7 good years. Have them store up and store away in barns so that when the 7 lean years come, that you'll have an abundance to carry you through. And not only yourself, but now you can get a lot of wealth, Pharaoh, because you know what? All the lands around are going to be coming looking to buy some of the grain that you stored up during those 7 years. And so now what happened is because he does this, because he takes that next step, because he goes for complete victory and not just stopping the enemy, he gets placed. Pharaoh says, there will be no one in the land except me relating to the throne that is greater than Joseph. So how did Joseph get the complete victory? Because now nobody else can mess with him. Potiphar's wife can't mess with him. His brothers can't mess with him. The guy on the street. So he went from being in prison where everybody could do whatever they wanted to him to because he went for and completed the victory. Now he's got that real freedom where he doesn't have to worry about the attacks of people who are trying to get at him when he's just trying to do the right thing. So we see here, he stopped his enemy by continuing to do what was right, regardless of what they did. He got the complete victory because he didn't just say, I'm just going to do it just enough to get myself out of prison. I'm going to make a change in this land, and that's going to give me that complete victory. Now, the last thing we got to see that he does is we've got to make sure we share that testimony. And I love the way Joseph shares his testimony because there was also a famine in the land where his brothers were at. And they had to come looking for some food. They didn't know that it was Joseph when they got there. But when they finally find out, when Joseph finally reveals to them who he is, they are terrified. Can you imagine, right? Because they're looking at their own heart. They're thinking, boy, what would I do if one of my brothers did this to me? Man, I'd have them at it. I'd have them working as my slave the rest of their life. And then after I got bored of that, I'd probably take their head off. So they are terrified when they find out that Joseph is now over the second person in all of Egypt and the power that he has to take out on them. But here's where Joseph shares his testimony. I love it. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 45. And we're going to begin at verse 4. It says, Then Joseph said to his brothers, Come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves. He's pleading with them to not be angry with themselves. Like I said, this is why he reminds me so much of Jesus. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 there will be no plowing and no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and save your lives by a great deliverance. As he says later on, that thing that you meant for evil, God meant for good. Now, how is that for sharing your testimony? You did what you did. That's okay. My God had another plan with what you were trying to do. So we see here 2 very good illustrations. First of all, that faith without actions is that we see all through this. It's by what they did that they got the victory, not just by what they believe. So when you get onto that battlefield and you know that the battle is coming and you see the enemy in front of you, don't just speak the words. Take the action that God has given you, and you will have that legendary victory. And once you have the victory, go out and share that testimony with your neighbor, your friend, your children, everybody that will listen. And you know what happens then? You've already started your journey to the next legendary victory, and you've started it on the right foot. So I pray that this has been a blessing to you. I pray that this has been something where you've gotten something out of this that you can apply and not just get some information, but to make a change in your life with it. And that's what our goal has always been here. Now, if you haven't seen the other videos that we've had in this series, we are going to have up on the screen here the titles of those videos and where you can find those at. I pray that you watch them. And again, share your testimony. If you're finding that these are helping you, if you're finding that these are helping you to make a change in your life, please let other people know about where they can find them as well, because we want to encourage as many people as we can in the Lord, that we might all get stronger and bring a little bit of that heaven down to earth. I pray you have a blessed evening. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you real soon.